Lots of people traveled to the big station at the end of the line. Engines from the other railways sometimes pull their trains, then stay the night and go home the next day. Gordon was talking to one of these engines. "When I was young and green," he said, "I remember going to London." "Do you know the place?" asked Gordon. "The station's called King's Cross." "King's Cross," snorted the engine. "London's Euston. Everybody knows that." "Rubbish," said Duck. "London's Paddington. I would know. I worked there." They argued all day long until they went to sleep. The argument continued on the next day, even when the other engine went back home. "Stupid thing," said Gordon crossly. "I've no patience with engines from the other railway." "Stupid yourself," said Duck. "London's Paddington. Paddington! I worked there." "Stop arguing," James broke in. "You're making me tired. Besides, you both agreed on something." The engines glared at James. "What's that?" they asked hastily. "London's not Euston," laughed James. "Now shut up." But Gordon rolled away still grumbling. "I'm sure it's King's Cross. I'll go and prove it to you all." But unbeknownst to Gordon, that was easier said than done. London lay beyond the big station at the other end of the line, where Gordon had to stop and wait for another engine to take his train. "If I didn't stop," he thought, "I could go to London." He tried every excuse to make his way over to London. One day he ran through the station and left his passengers behind. Another time he tried to start before the firemen could uncouple the coaches, but it was no use. None of his tricks worked. "Oh dear," he thought sadly, "I shall never get to London now." One day he pulled the express to the station as usual. His fireman uncoupled the coaches, and he ran to a siding to wait till it was time to go home. The coaches waited and waited at the platform, but their engine didn't come. Suddenly, a porter ran across and spoke to Gordon's driver. "The inspector's on the platform. He wants to see you. It's something important." The driver got out of the cab and walked over to the station. Soon he came back looking very excited. "What's happened?" asked the fireman. "The engine for the express has had an accident," he said. "Now they want us to take the train to London. I said we'd do it if the Fat Controller agreed. They telephoned him and said we could. How's that?" "Fine," said the fireman. "We'll show them what the Fat Controller's engines can do." Gordon was then coupled to the train. The guard blew his whistle and he began puffing out of the station. Come on, puffed Gordon to the coaches. We're going to town, sang the coaches. Soon, Gordon noticed that London was a long way ahead. "Never mind," he said. "I like a good long run to stretch my wheels." But all the same, he was relieved to see London come in sight. Next morning, the Fat Controller came into his office and looked at the letters on his desk. "I wonder how Gordon is doing in London," he said. The station master knocked and came in. "Excuse me, sir, have you seen the news?" The Fat Controller stared. "Not yet. Why?" he asked. "Take a look at this, sir." The Fat Controller took the newspaper. "Goodness gracious me," he exclaimed. "Gordon's become famous in London." He returned the next day. The Fat Controller spoke to his driver and fireman. "I see you had a good welcome in London." "We certainly did, sir," they exclaimed. "We signed lots of autographs, and many people took pictures of Gordon." "Good," said the Fat Controller. "You must have had a wonderful time, Gordon." Gordon looked glum. "No, sir, I didn't," he said sadly. "London's all wrong. It isn't King's Cross anymore. It's St. Pancras." And he wheezed in steam. The Fat Controller just laughed.